to the channel. Thank you for coming by this morning. You know, it's a pretty impressive morning today. It's Friday. It's Good Friday. It's also episode 3 of The Falcon and the Winter Soldier. So I'm heavily excited. I've seen it already, and that kind of got me inspired to do this video. So today's video, well, before I even get started with that, let me introduce myself, just in case you don't know. Hello, I am Lewis Porter Jr., and this is my channel. And today we're going to talk about what's the real reason for creating and working on your comic book or campaign setting. A lot of you out there are doing this for all kinds of reasons, and I can't speak to your individual reasons and why you're doing it, but I know why I did mine. So when I first started working in the gaming industry was kind of after years of working in the comic book industry. I had worked as a typical person in stores on the retail side, and then in my very early 20s I got hired on by Attic Books, which was the publisher for Comics Values Monthly, which is one of the few monthly comic book guides in the early 90s before Wizard. And I worked for them, and when that job went away, I still had the itch of being involved in the industry because I love the industry. So I did the most logical thing I could do. I started my own fanzine. At the time it was a fanzine. It wasn't even a magazine. It was a fanzine. And I did that for about 6 issues. And I burnt through a lot of money. And I learned what not to do and what to do. I still had that burning desire of doing it. So out of that, when I was role-playing with some buddies, a friend of mine was creating his own fantasy world, and we played it, and I liked it. And I said, well, how difficult could it be? I mean, come on. I mean, how difficult is this stuff? It couldn't be that difficult. Yeah, I started in 1996, and the book was finally released in 2000. And I found that it was a lot more difficult than I thought it was. It was incredibly hard to do at the time. We're talking, you know, 20 years ago, before PDF publishing became big, before RPG Now, before a lot of this stuff, when you were selling directly to stores or directly to people online. And it was something, I always tell people I had to do it. You know, the first setting I did was Haven, City of Violence. It was a crime noir love letter to the original Top Secret role-playing game. I always loved Top Secret. It's one of my favorite role-playing games. I like spies. So me doing a gritty urban crime one didn't seem like that big of a deal. So I went with it and did that. And I continued to, of course, play Dungeons & Dragons and everything else. But that was my first baby. That was the first one I really was like, yeah, you can do this. And then I started making products for all the stuff for D20 coming out, da-da-da. And then I came up with, I gotta think which one came first. Then I came up with 2 ideas at kind of the same time. The first one was Undead Nazi Elves, which eventually morphed all the way into Obsidian Twilight and Obsidian Apocalypse. They're directly related just from that one idea. And the other thing that got developed was a fantasy setting that made sense to me. So out of that, Neo Exodus was developed. And really the reasons I did both of those 2 settings came down to the mindset of I was tired of seeing what people thought about fantasy, because to me they were so Tolkien-esque, and it's tough to really like a lot of that stuff because, for a lack of a better term, I don't see people who look like me in those settings. You know, typical fantasy is very, very European, very, very this specific look, this specific thing, and I don't fit in that. Let's keep it real. I do not fit in that. I mean, the closest thing you get would be the Moors, and even that's a tough sell to some people. So it's very much like a very specific look and feel. And I believe, fantasy should be fantasy. It should be fantastic. It should be different. It should be amazing. And doing the stuff that people were doing in the 1930s and redoing it now in the 21st century doesn't make sense to me. So, I'm a big believer that the magic should be like technology. That's what they use in their world, and it makes a lot of sense, and it should be that way. And not everybody feels that way. Not everybody wants to do high fantasy. I mean, I do. I like that, but not everybody wants that, so I get it. But for me, I knew that I couldn't put another fantasy world with elves and dwarves. Oh God. I mean, how many of those do you want to throw up in your mouth? I mean, how many different elves can you do? So it's just like, what am I doing? What are we doing? So that's why I built all new races. I built them very radically different from what you expect. And, I think that also tied in when I did Obsidian Apocalypse. We did some things that are very traditional horror connected, but we also did some things that you'd never seen before. The Khmer are one of my favorite, well, I could say inventions, but I stole the idea from a Legion of Superheroes comic book. It basically was Ra's al Ghul in the 30th century, well, 31st century, wouldn't even have a body anymore. If you don't know who Ra's al Ghul is, it's Batman's main villain he's had for many years, and he uses the Lazarus pits to keep regenerating. But in the 31st century, his essence had just basically boiled down to being just the blood. And he would clone his bodies, and his blood would invade his cloned bodies, and he would live again. And basically, the infamous, its bodies were sleeves. Very, very cyberpunk, but makes a lot of sense, even for the character. And I thought that'd be a cool idea we typed in with Obsidian Apocalypse. That's how the Khmer came out. And it was just such a weirdly cool idea that I knew no one had done. And you weren't going to see that in fantasy. I mean, you just weren't. So that's why I did that. When I built the Sinian in Neo Exodus, I wanted to do cool, monstrous-looking PC characters, but I didn't want to use rocks, because everybody's done rocks and stones. So I said, let's do crystal. A crystalline creature, big like the Thing, and the Thing was the ideal look of them, and make these guys really impressive spellcasters. Because anybody that big and bulky, you'd actually think, oh, he's going to be tough. And it's like, yeah, they're tough, but they're really more spellcasters than they are physical. So you play with stuff, you play with tropes, you twist them around. And, honestly, I've done modern, I've done fantasy, I've even done a little science fiction, world building and campaign setting. So it's funny to me because I build these things and then I just get them out of my system. It's like I had to do it. I just had to do it. It wasn't that I was hoping to make tons of money on it or anything, which money's nice, don't get me wrong, but I had to do it just to get the creativity out of me. And I think that's always the main focus if you're really serious about what you're creating. It's not that you even have a choice to do it. I don't create things I'm not excited about. That's why some people ask me, hey, would you be interested in working on such and that? I'm like, nah, not really. Nothing personal. I mean, it's got to really excite me to my core. And not everything does. And some things that do are weird. And then sometimes I do things like a true publisher that I am. I do it because I know it's going to sell. But the things that I specifically work on, like hands-on, where I'm really needing it and I'm really, directly involved, yeah, you can see my fingerprints all over it. It's just something that I do, and I like that. And I think most people who are in the creative field feel that same way. But at the same time, sometimes you got to do stuff because of the money, and I get it. You don't like to do that, but you do it. And it is what it is. Just accept it. Keep it moving. There's nothing you can say about it. But there's sometimes you want to do stuff that's just for you. And there's nothing wrong with that. I make a joke all the time. I did a book on dogs. A small little source book on dogs. It is not a big seller. It's for D20 Modern. And it's about dogs. Hey, I did it because I wanted to do it. That's why I did it. And having to have that ability to do that kind of stuff really gives me a lot of strength that a lot of people can't do. Some people want to work for the big companies because they have a great idea they want to include. Well, they find out later that's not going to happen, and it doesn't work that way. If you want to be, that level of super creative where you're making things very far outside the box, well, you've got to do it on your own. The mainstream stuff has to be, I guess the term we're using now is mayonnaise. Because it has to be plain, it has to be general, and it has to be simple. That everybody can accept it. You can't make, Hellfire's hot sauce and think everybody's going to eat that up. It's just not going to happen. You've got to make I hate to say it like this, the most bland, the most in the middle of the road kind of project. The more extreme your product gets, the more niche-y it becomes also. And that's kind of the part that can turn off people. But once again, what are you doing this for? What's the reason for what you're creating? Why are you creating it? I know my why. What's yours? That's the question we're asking today. So do yourself a favor. Below, put your answer why you're doing it. Like I said, I know why I'm doing it. So what's your reason? Thank you so much for watching. I really appreciate it. And most importantly, go watch The Falcon and the Winter Soldier. Episode 3 was amazing. Oh my God, so good. So I'm loving this series. It's getting better and better. And as always, thank you so much. I'll talk to you later. Hey, thank you for checking out my channel. Do me a favor, check out my other videos. And if you like what you see, subscribe.